When we get to the panel on the second half of this, so we do have some experienced botanists on our panel, but we are kind of more focusing on that EIA perspective. And my colleague is going to be talking a little bit later this afternoon around some of the technical EPA guidance. So before I start, because it's a joint presentation across multiple pieces of legislation, we naturally have inconsistent terminology. So just to clarify before I start, and I probably will default to the EPA area because that's where I work, an applicant and a referrer and a proponent are the same thing. There's a person obviously wanting to do it. An application is a Part 5 thing, a referral is a Part 4. And so in that case, there's proposals. So we do a little bit of inconsistent terminology, but I will try and not confuse everybody. So it seems quite an obvious thing, but flora and vegetation surveys are required for a whole lot of different things. Get my pen to work. As most of you are aware, it's required for things such as most clearing permits, and that includes clearing permits assessed by the DWER as well as DEMERS. They're required for EPA assessments, they're required for DEMERS mining and petroleum assessments and exploration proposals, as well as the referrals and assessments from the DOEE. For each of these things, we all have a range of different policies that obviously outline those information requirements. The Part 5 assessments have a guide for the assessment of the application, as well as a guide for preparing re-veg plans. EPA Part 4 assessments have our environmental factor guideline for flora and veg, as well as the technical guidance, which is obviously where a lot of the EPA's detail on how to actually carry out those surveys are found. For EPBC assessments, a lot of that information is contained in the recovery plan, conservation advice and threat abatement plans for those relative species and communities. And DEMERS also has guidance around mining proposals and guidelines for development of environmental management plans. So, regardless of whether your proposal is assessed by the DAE, through the provisions of the clearing regs, a mining proposal or EPA Part 4, all regulators actually do recognise and expect that surveys do need to be fit for purpose and may require different survey intensities. And so these expectations really do depend on where it's located, particularly in terms of previous clearing and conservation values, the scale of the proposal, what exactly the species and communities are that are going to be impacted, the significance of that impact, and also about what part of the Act or which Act proposal is actually being assessed under. So again, it seems quite obvious the purpose of flora and veg surveys is actually really to inform that upfront project planning, which will actually help to assist and avoid and minimise impacts, and secondly to inform any subsequent environmental impact assessment. So what is actually really key to this second point is that regulators actually require that survey data to be interpreted. Includes putting things in a local, regional and statewide context to what that vegetation is going to be impacted is, looking at both indirect impacts as well as cumulative impacts from other developments, and then coming to a conclusion predicting what those residual impacts will be to both the flora and vegetation. So there is some commonalities between our processes. Our overarching Act principles are either the same or quite similar. We all need a proposal that is adequately defined. We all need a mitigation hierarchy that does actually need genuine consideration and application. We all require both direct and indirect impacts to be quantified. Proponent needs to have their own view of what the significance of those impacts are, and we all need to actually see what those proposed management mechanisms are to avoid, minimise and mitigate those impacts. There are some differences, obviously. So Mining Act EP assessments and DOE assessments will actually often involve multiple environmental factors, although there are obviously occasions where there is only one. Part 5, however, can only assess impacts resulting from the clearing of native vegetation. So it can actually consider more than just flora and vegetation, and so however can include impacts to fauna and fauna habitat that actually come as a result of that clearing. Each of these different assessment processes have a different objective. Part 5 has the 10 clearing principles. The EPA has an objective for flora and vegetation. DOEE look at the significant impact on matters of national environmental significance, actions on Commonwealth land or actions by the Commonwealth, and mining proposals also have an objective for flora and vegetation, as well as actually for their other environmental values about maintaining representation, diversity, viability and ecological function. DMIRS also have a different approach. They actually have a formal risk assessment, which is that low is reasonably practicable. So that is something specific to the DMIRS mining proposals, mining and petroleum proposals. One of the other key areas of differences between Part 5 and the EPA and the DOEE assessments is the treatment of rebuild vegetation. So for the EPA and the DOEE, if this rehabilitated vegetation fits the characteristics of a threatened ecological community, then it can be assessed and treated as such. This is quite different from Part 5, where rehab can only be assessed if that rehab was required under another written law, such as a ministerial condition or a clearing permit condition. So it is actually quite a key difference there. So often is the question is who is going to assess. So this is probably actually when will the EPA, DOEE or DMIRS assess. So from the DOEE perspective, obviously you need to trigger a matter of national environmental significance, and they have quite a handy list of species and communities. So this will obviously help in identifying where those are likely to occur. From an EPA perspective, we do have a significance test, which does discuss things such as the specific value to be impacted, the extent and consequences of those impacts, and what the existing cumulative impacts are. So the proposal is unlikely to trigger the EPA significance test, and it actually might be assessed by DMIRS as a mining or petroleum proposal. However, one of the key things, if it is likely to involve multiple environmental factors, then it won't be assessed as a clearing permit. So based on that, so when will Part 5 clearing assess it? DMIRS only assess proposals on mining and petroleum tenements or State Agreement Act areas, whereas the DWER will generally not assess those not on those areas, although they can. And as I said, they only relate to impacts resulting from the clearing of native vegetation. So how can we actually make the EIA process smoother? So we've put together a few examples of some of the things that we do find in EIA documents at times that do often cause a bit of delays in the process. And I know it seems obvious, and I'm sure everybody does it, but planning ahead and planning early. What does happen, obviously, is footprints change throughout the process, and what happens is when some of that information comes to us is that we do actually see areas of footprints that actually aren't surveyed. Those last-minute changes in construction areas do actually often result in that. So it can obviously be about being generous when identifying flora study areas, because what we will do, we will actually normally ask for further survey if we do actually have impact areas that are not actually have data around them. And that can also then help provide